Well, hello, welcome to B-Sides. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good middle of the night. I don't know what time you're watching this, but thanks for being part of it. I am Pastor John, and I am here with Pastor Rustin. Say hey, Rustin.
What's up, John?
How you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Those of you who are watching and have seen these before may know there's a little bit of a role reversal here because usually Rustin does the welcome and I say, hey, but today I'm doing the welcome because we're going to be covering a text that Rustin preached on at Coramdeo Church a couple weeks ago. But before we get to the text, there's two things we got to deal with. The first one is, those of you who like this, like it, share it, make it known. We'd appreciate your support that way. It'd mean a lot to us. Let us hear from you. And the second thing we always do every time we do a B-Sides is
little drum of whiskey.
Gotta have a little drink here. So Rustin, what are you drinking today?
Well, I am drinking the last little teeny bit of my old Potrero single malt, single rye whiskey.
It's all gone.
This is the last. I mean, I hardly ever kill a bottle, but I'm doing it today on B-Sides.
On video. Do you need to play like taps? Like,
I don't know how taps goes. I was about to start singing some random tune. How's it go?
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun,
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 dun.
dun,
Yeah.
dun, dun.
Yep.
Okay.
This
All
is
right, that's my
this is a really great rye that is just super complex out of San Francisco, and my brother got it for me for, I think it was Christmas 3 years ago.
Wow.
And it's not a cheap bottle. He had just gotten a raise or something. So I'm gonna kill it. So what do you got, John?
This was a gift. This is a bottle. I don't know how to pronounce. I think it's Grangestone.
Grangestone.
Grangestone. This is a blended Isla.
Oh.
Typically, you don't have blended Islas, but this is a blended Isla. I don't know what kind of Islas they're using.
Are you sure it's not just Grangestone?
It might be Grangestone, but Grangestone just is funner to say,
yeah.
right? Grangestone. So yeah, it's an Isla, so it's got that peaty, smoky, seawater, salty air. I love it. So
I can't even tell you how. Yeah, cheers.
Yeah, I almost got shunned there. Okay.
Sorry, man. So, man, this has got so much, like, I don't know, honey on the nose.
Oh.
So hits you in the face with this, like, floral honey note. Mm.
This is like campfire, sea air.
Mm.
It has a thick consistency, though. It's almost like milky. It's fantastic. You're having a moment there, aren't you?
It's that good. It's just one of those,
good.
It's just that good.
Wow.
I can't even quite put my finger on it, but it's like I said, honey, but it's honey and it's floral, and it's also got this, like, at the end, a little bit of a smoky note that you'd expect, smoky spice note that you'd expect from a rye.
Yeah. That has a little bit of a peppery element to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it's not peppery as in like harsh at all. It's like peppery as in the very back end. It has that aromatic thing going on. It reminds you of pepper. But it's one of the it's sweet, it's smooth, and then it kind of has that peppery note at the end. It's really nice. Honey pepper. Like, imagine honey and pepper together.
Honey pepper. That sounds like a term of endearment for your wife. Hey, honey pepper.
Yeah, or a spice gone wrong, like lemon pepper.
Oh man, yeah, these are really good.
Yeah, I wish I had more of this already.
You could always save it.
Well, I'm not going to save it. I mean, it's already in my glass.
Yeah, that'd be kind of gross, right? So is it just me, or when you have an exceptionally fine whiskey or a bourbon or a scotch, do you find yourself just craving tobacco products?
Oh, yeah. I've been really good not smoking any tobacco products for a long time, but I had I actually had a little bit of Ardbeg with a buddy of mine not too long ago, and the first thing that came into my mind when I took a sip was, man, a tobacco product of my choice would be great right now.
Yes. Yeah, this one is like begging for a cigarette.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think if you're looking on my bookshelf, you might be able to find a pack that's laying exposed there somewhere.
Oh yeah, I see it. Oh wow, yeah, yeah.
You can probably guess what it is, but we won't go there right now.
Blue, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I haven't.
Make sure you get the light blue, because the dark blue is menthol. I made the mistake on the bike trip. They're like, I said, I want the blue. They're like, do you want dark blue or light blue? And I'm like, well, dark blue just sounds like stronger, so I'll take the dark blue, please. And I get it, and I was like, oh dang, it's menthol. What did I do?
It never sounds good when you go to buy something like cigarettes. You're like, can I have the baby blue package?
But it actually is the better one.
The baby blue package. Yep.
So lesson learned.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, well, should we just dive right into it?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've been doing a series on the 10 Commandments, and you took the fifth word,
the
fifth commandment, which has to do with family.
Yep.
So honor your father. Yeah, honor your father and mother, and there's a promise added to it that it may go well with you in the land.
Yep.
So one of the things I wanted to just kind of pick your brain on and have you maybe expand on a bit is that when you read through the 10 words, the 10 commandments, right? These are going to govern an entire nation.
Yeah.
You don't have a single word spoken about governors, about policemen, about the state, about any other human authority. It only talks about mom and dad.
Yep.
Now, is that like a gross oversight, or is there a reason that this is the only commandment that specifically deals with authority?
Yeah, I think that if you consider the commandments leading up to the fifth commandment, right? Mm-hmm. And how there is an allegiance, a firm stance being made in the first four commandments about allegiance to God, the Lord, who has rescued you out of Egypt. Yep. That really sets you up for the fifth commandment. But what's interesting is that because you have your ultimate authority in God, and then the first commandment that starts to touch on our engagement with other people, it's like it's the next thing down from God. It's an authority figure. It's the authority figure that God instituted in creation.
Okay.
He made the family unit to have fathers and mothers and children, right? That's the original government, right? And it's really fun preparing for preaching on the fifth word, while at the same time I was preparing to teach the God and government class that we did, because you realize that there is everything you know about, or everything that kind of comes later in the story about how we're to honor the emperor, honor the rulers and authorities, is downstream from this commandment.
Okay.
And this is the commandment that if you go and study like a book on biblical ethics that's going through the 10 commandments, this is the chapter on this. In this one, you'll have all the discussions about human authorities, governors, governances, and different spheres like the church and the civil government. This is where it all starts, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Is that what you kind of you're getting at there? Like,
yeah, it seems like you have something profound is being communicated when like you said, you start with no other gods, right? No images.
Yep.
Don't take the name in vain. Be a people of rest. And then the next thing is mom and dad.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
So that's communicating in the giving of the law something about the significance of the family.
Yes,
in connection with social order and structures and culture. And
I think that if you think about that question about why not the fifth commandment be specifically about honoring the king, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Right.
And I think the answer there is because the king, if you were to say that, then you would have a centralized authority figure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas God has, in his plan for humanity, actually multiplied these authority figures that all are responsible to him, right? Every family, we're told, is named after the Father, right? Every family gets its name from God the Father.
Yeah.
And that God is displaying something in like I'm thinking about kaleidoscopes, or like, like there's these multifaceted pictures of humanity, and there's these authority structures in the family, the father having a wife and having kids and leading that family, that is saying something throughout all of our human interactions, but is also the way that God wants to rule, right?
Yeah.
There's never a moving beyond the family to like scrapping it to then having a king, right?
Yes.
The king needs to rule a kingdom that actually has a bunch of families that are operating as individual families with their own kind of sovereign leadership over their sphere.
Yeah.
So there's a whole picture of what governance in a culture and society looks like in that fifth word, right?
Yeah.
If you think that somehow the fifth word or the family government is scrappable, and you want to go down some communist, like pipe dream where the family is eliminated and you have a single ruler, what you've really just done is instituted slavery. Like, that's what that is, right? There's no more. There's something that's happening with the family structure as a father and a wife and kids, or father and a mother and kids, that actually leads to freedom.
Okay.
So does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah. Well, yeah, a little bit. I mean, I think there's more questions there. Like you made a comment in your sermon that I thought was really interesting. And you said that basically the alternative to a godly ordered family is prison.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
When you abandon the family, so would you mind?
Yeah. I think what I said was that parents when children aren't taught to honor their father and mother, and they don't do it, that they're being prepared for slavery. And I think that we can actually say that you can actually see contemporary examples of this, that kids that are not brought up with a father and mother that care for them and teach them in the instruction of the Lord and teach them to obey their authority, are going to be those who don't obey any authority and don't. And because they're not able to govern themselves and in obedience, they actually end up being given over to their desires, such that they end up becoming the wards of the state, either through entering the prison system, or I think that in the past it would have been, you're putting yourself into a position of slavery by not actually having self-control, by not actually ruling over the small things that God's given you to rule over. The family is the gymnasium, is what I called it, where that actually happens. But I think that when the family is abandoned, right, when the family starts to disintegrate, I think that you're headed towards cultural slavery. I think that there's a link there. I think that because if everything is downstream from individuals and family, right?
Yeah. What do you mean by that? Everything's downstream.
Sure. Well, if every individual, right, is not taught to rule over themselves and to order their lives in a way that is not, erratic and anarchic, right? And the families aren't teaching their kids to do that, and the family is breaking down, then there's all these broken pieces that don't contribute to flourishing in a society. So the state, the civil government, needs to pick up the pieces in order to establish order, and usually by some sort of power grab and force. Right? So that's what I mean by downstream. There's a sense in which the family is the greatest defense against totalitarianism, right? When it's also the greatest target for anybody who wants power. If you can somehow eliminate the family, you have an easy path to it. That's why all the big regimes that did that, that's exactly what they go to do. They want to destroy the family identity. They want to eliminate that authority structure. States will claim kids as belonging to them, not belonging to their parents. So there's a path that direction if things start to go. And this is where, if you think about a culture or a society, the answer to the problem isn't, oh, we need strong families. That is part of the answer, to avoid some sort of cataclysmic, authoritative state. That is part of the answer. But what we really need is even further downstream. Is you need revival. You need individuals like this. When I talk about God and government, I talk about self-government, family government, church government, and civil government. But self-government is where it all really starts to go wrong, right? It's people who do not submit to God, who end up and live their life in light of His grace, and live new lives because they've been raised to new life, right? And put away the selfish desires and whatever. That those people are those who by grace also lead their families to do the same, right? And if you don't have that, and you're not seeing people, you're seeing just rampant autonomy, right? Like where the individual just does whatever they want, right? And then you necessarily are leading to a situation where those autonomous individuals get into marriages, and guess what? Two autonomous individuals don't work so good together, right? So that aren't submitting to one another mutually and have some vision for what the family's supposed to be under God and His rule and His reign. Well, then that causes strife. The marriage breaks down. It causes a whole downstream of problems with kids, which we know from research, even secularists know that there's fewer things more damaging to kids than when there's not a mom or not a dad in the picture, or there's brokenness at that level. And so then you compound that over time, and you have a whole culture of people, right, where there's lots of people that are fatherless. And that leads to a culture situation where there's more and more anarchy, autonomy, and the state kind of wants to reel it in using power and force. And then those individuals actually want the state to do that too, because you don't want. There's this desire to stay away from anarchy and chaos.
Yeah. It makes me think, Russ, as I'm hearing you talk about this, that there must be a connection between the breakdown of the family, and there's all sorts of things that a family, like very practical things that a family provides. So once you have a family that's broken down, you can see even just connected to common grace. So not even a Christian family, just a family, right? When you don't have that family, the occurrence or the likelihood of young people being put in jail, being homeless, having a broken marriage themselves, kids outside of marriage, drug abuse, all that stuff, suicide, depression, it's through the roof. The majority of those issues in young people are some of the ramifications for broken families. So even when you just have a normal family, it's not even a believing family, just by virtue of common grace, you are the society and culture at large is being protected from those things. But I'm just wondering, when you have the breakdown of the family, does that make does that create a culture in which things like socialism is more appealing because the government now is providing what the family ordinarily would provide? So it's like things like, free education. Well,
Yeah.
how do people get education? Well, families work to put their kids, support their kids through college, but now we don't have to do that because the state does it. I'm just wondering if there's a connection between the appeal to socialism and the breakdown of the family.
I think there absolutely is a connection. And when I think about cultural slavery, that's where my mind goes. It may not fit the same categories that we might not normally have, but what I mean by that is socialism, communism, all those isms where the state has its hands and fingers in all the spheres that God ordained to have their own authority structure, like the family.
Yeah.
And where the state's more and more trying to act like the dad, right? And trying to act like the pastor, right? Those situations where that's happened in history, where the state is trying to eliminate family structures as well as eliminate religion, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Those when that happens, and I think that there's a connection between those ideas and socialism, because it's about control at all those levels that God's ordained there be these other structures, these other spheres. When that happens, I think that that's a form. I think that's a form of slavery. That makes sense. It's a kind of it's a kind of forking, and in that it's a forking over to the state what God had intended to live in the household, right? Yeah. And I think that, that's one of the things I pointed out in my sermon was that slavery, every instance of slavery, usually also is an instance of the family breaking down. Like you see this in the Exodus story, where the state over the Hebrews is killing their babies, right? The state's executing their authority. The Pharaoh is executing his authority to eliminate the population size of the Hebrews, and overstepping right into where a father is supposed to protect his family. And basically, imagine what it would have been like to be a father during that time, where you have some kids, and the state is basically saying, "Yeah, we're supposed to kill your kids." Like, and then he tells the whole country, like, if you see a Hebrew boy, just throw him in the Nile. Right? There's a breakdown happening there.
Yeah.
Right. And there's
absolutely.
And this kind of goes back to the fourth commandment too. But when the state says, you're a slave, you don't get any days off, right? Yeah. Well, what does that do? It means that the family structure doesn't actually have the opportunity to come together and rest together, right? And Sabbath, and where the Hebrew dad would have been teaching his kid about the Lord, right? There's an interference there as well. So, I think when you bring up socialism, I think that there's a connection there. I think that we're in the middle of a time right now where we're so downstream from, just generally, culturally speaking, we're downstream from a lot of breakdown in the family, a breakdown in, from everything from like marriage and divorce rates, and the forsaking of those commitments and covenants, to redefining marriage.
Yeah, I was like, that's a huge.
Yeah, and
it's a huge issue.
Yeah, and they're like redefining marriage in terms of there not even being a mother and a father, which is God's structure for that sphere.
Yep.
And you have, at the same time that's happening, you are moving steadily towards more and more state-sponsored welfare, etc. And sometimes I wonder if it's a combination of symptomatic, like if there's a problem at the heart, right? The problem, it's not like the state initially caused that problem.
Yeah. Yes.
Right? Yeah. Sin causes that problem. But I do think that actually the state in taking over those spheres and their responsibilities actually produces it's like a paradoxical never-ending cycle where now
absolutely
now I don't need to I either don't even feel like I have a calling in my life as a husband or a father to exercise the authority, the responsibility of authority that God's given me. I now can just point them to the state. Like, it's really easy, as a parent, to feel like you don't have a responsibility to teach your kids when the government, like to be invested in what's being taught to your kids, right?
Yeah.
When the government does such a good job just kind of providing that whole thing for you. All you do is just drop them off at the corner of the street, and then they come back educated, It's like, but there's a whole discipleship that's happening there too that requires that parents are paying attention, and a part of that, and it's a responsibility on the father. But how easy is it as a father to feel like, it's easier not to think about it when you don't have to actually do it, right? And I think that there can be good instances of public education. I think you did a video a while back on that. That was really good. But I think that's just one example. But then talk about provision too. Like the father is supposed to provide for his family, right?
Yeah.
What does the kid learn by watching his father provide for the family? Right?
He learned. Oh yeah. He learns that God is a provider, that we were made to do work. He learns that his father loves him, and provides for him. He's learning work ethic. All sorts of masculinity is being modeled for him.
Yep. And then, so what does that same kid learn when he doesn't have a father providing for him? Instead, it's the state.
Yeah,
like,
he learned.
There's a whole theology being taught by some of these things.
Yep.
And it's not that it's again, I think it's symptomatic, but I think it also produces the problem that it aims to remove too.
Yeah, and one of the reasons, as you're talking, I'm thinking through one of the reasons it actually makes it worse is because the state can't actually be mom and dad.
Yeah.
Right. So the state can try and provide things that mom and dad might provide, but what they can't provide is proximity, closeness, trust, safety, the whole idea of family and belonging. Those are things that the state can't provide, and those things are so essential for a kid to flourish. So because the state steps in and says, well, we can provide those things, well, you're not actually providing the most fundamental things that kid needs. And so that leads to an increasingly dysfunctional society, because now that child has a tainted view of family and is most likely going to reproduce that.
Yep.
So it ends up just repeating itself over and over again because the state isn't in the home.
Yeah. It's funny you kind of say that reproduction downstream. I was listening to an interview not very long ago where Rod Dreher talking to Albert Mohler about his newest book. I think it's called
Mohler's newest book or Dreher's newest book?
Dreher's newest book. Live Not by Lies.
Yeah, it's getting a lot of press right now.
Yeah, and there's a moment in that interview. I guess in that book there's a whole chapter on the family as a resistance unit, and so they started talking about that concept, resistance unit against totalitarian, like what do you call like new to soft totalitarianism. But one of the things which we could, go watch the interview because it's not, you're gonna be like, what the heck is that about? But it's a good interview. But one of the things that he talks about is that he visited this conservative Christian college, and he was talking to the president of the college, and I don't know how they got to the subject, but at one point the president said, I'm really concerned about, my biggest concern about the students in our college is that I don't think that any of them are equipped to actually lead or maintain a healthy family, right? He's like, how could that be? You're a Christian, like a conservative Christian Bible believing institute, and apparently the president told Rod that it's because none of them have seen one.
Wow.
Like that's just like there's this breakdown that is cascading, has a cascading effect.
Yeah.
It's like when you hear that and you think about the cascading effect and the way in which that impacts culture and the way that impacts the world, and because it impacts the world, it impacts the witness for Christ, and you realize now how missional those chapters are in Paul's letters that talk about the household code and the husband love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for them.
Yep.
Fathers, train up your children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord.
Yep.
Sometimes they just seem like to-dos after the gospel, like, oh God, we just got to do these things because to do these things. But you realize there's a whole mission involved.
Absolutely. You brought up Ephesians there, or I think you did, or you implied it. But
Yes.
I've talked with people, coming kind of out of the church planting background, and everybody's talking about mission, and you get to a book like Ephesians, and you go, "Where's the mission in Ephesians?" Right?
Yeah.
And it's like, does he talk about it? And I think your initial impulse is to go, well, no, he doesn't. But I think what you're saying, which I totally agree with, is that we don't have the eyes to think about it because we've removed mission from a biblical context.
Yes.
And what Paul envisions mission looking like in a community begins with a husband loving his wife and a wife respecting her husband, and there being a healthy relationship with the children, and then there being a difference that's made in the workplace.
Yes.
That's where he goes with Ephesians chapter 5. And that is the front door of mission in the world. It's families that have been reordered around the gospel.
Yeah.
And it looks very normal and ordinary.
It does. I think that it's funny. I can't remember who said it, but somebody once said, everybody wants to change the world, but nobody wants to do the dishes.
Yeah.
But you realize those things are connected. Right?
I think I read that in a Mike Horton book.
Was it a Horton book?
Was it Ordinary?
Was it? I don't know. But that's...
Yeah, he talks, he does like an interview, or maybe there was a gal, she was a missionary in a third world country, and she got back and then ended up getting married and having kids and was reflecting on the mission stuff. And she essentially says it was way easier to get excited about going to a third world country than it is to, change diapers and do dishes and take care of kids during the day, because nobody's celebrating that.
Yes. But then you step back for a second and think, what kind of mission is this? Right?
Yeah.
That the mission takes form in families, teaching their kids to obey through giving them jobs like do the dishes, right?
Yeah.
Or a husband loving his wife and getting the dishes done so that she doesn't have to do them, or vice versa. Yeah. Like that love on display in the family is the way that God's plan for his mission to go forward. I think so when you connect that now to the idea of slavery and how this idea of there's a need for deliverance, right? And when the gospel gets into every kind of nook and cranny of our life, it equals deliverance in those different ways.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You see how first we're delivered from our sin, right, by Christ paying for it on the cross.
Yeah.
And then that transforms our marriages so that they're delivered from this kind of like brokenness, right?
Yeah.
And then you're from a first generation Christian that is learning how to father their kids, is passing on to their kids something new, right?
Yeah.
This new life and mission that's oriented around Christ as Lord, right? And
yep.
So and then if that happens on large scale, that changes the whole nation.
Right.
Absolutely. And so it's a long game. It's a full orbed human picture of how mission kind of touches every facet of our life.
Yep.
It really does. I think that, I used to think that we kind of like Christians were so like made too much of the family, but I realized that was just naivety.
Yeah. I feel the same way. It was like, why is the family such a big deal? And you're like, because God said it's a big deal.
Exactly.
So, and one of the things I think that maybe as we kind of sum it up here, the fact that in the giving of the law, God speaks about families and doesn't talk about civil government or other authorities.
Yeah.
It seems to be like he's saying there's no replacement for the family.
Yep.
And whatever breaks down in the family cannot be fixed by authorities downstream.
They can't.
Yes. People who gets the family right, all of those other levels of delegated authority, spheres of governing, those things all take care of themselves when the family gets it right. But when the family falls apart, it affects everything. Is that?
Yeah, and how I introduced the fifth word in my sermon was to talk about how it's kind of this hinge commandment between the two tables.
Yeah.
And how the second table, those two tables are summed up by Jesus, right?
Yep.
You shall, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind and strength, right?
Yep.
And then love your neighbors yourself. So where does honor your father and mother is the hinge between the first table, which is all about God, and your neighbor, right?
Yeah.
And how really that's a place where you learn to love your neighbor, and actually by honoring your parents and that whole picture getting worked out that way, it actually produces, when it's, it can have the effect of producing a society and culture that is more loving to your neighbor. You know what I mean? Like those things are deeply connected.
Absolutely.
And I think that sometimes people are, like I said, so excited about changing the world while their marriages are falling apart.
Yeah.
Right. They don't see, if you don't see the connection there, you're not thinking about this the way that God is thinking about this.
Yeah. That's a really good word, because I feel like there's so much hype and excitement about changing the world. And like you're saying, like it starts with learning to love each other, to submit to, honor moms and dads.
Yeah.
And it's a million little things.
Yeah.
So that's a good word. Well, thank you guys for joining us. Rustin, enjoyed the conversation with you. Do you have a final parting word as we close out here?
Kids, love and honor your mom and dad. Mom and dad, teach your kids in the nurture and admonition of the Lord.
Amen. On that, we will say thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.
Cheers.